Gaza. Let's get to the bottom line. Well, if anybody thought that the Palestinian-Israeli issue could be contained or kept quiet forever, the events of the past few weeks have shattered that notion. After the Hamas attack of October 7th that killed more than 1,000 Israelis, mostly civilians, Israel launched a massive bombing campaign across the Gaza Strip, killing thousands of Palestinian civilians, mostly women and children, and displaced half the population. Israel has also cut off food, water, and electricity. And U.S. President Joe Biden spent 7 hours in Israel expressing his support, but also asking Israelis not to be blinded by rage. When he got back to Washington, he made his case to the American people for billions of dollars in new spending on Israel, bundled with Ukraine aid. So what's next for the people in the Middle East? And despite its overwhelming military power, how much leverage does the United States actually have? Today, we're talking with Daniel Levy, who was a longtime negotiator and advisor for the Israeli government during the Oslo peace talks, and he's now president of the U.S. Middle East Project. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. Let me ask you, how should Israel respond in a way that you think would be fair and just?
I'm afraid I can't do justice to that question without acknowledging that we should never have been in this place. We should never have been in a situation where the constant warnings that you cannot leave the Palestinian situation to fester. You cannot have Palestinians who day after day, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, do not have their basic rights, live in a regime in which their freedoms are denied, they're permanently dispossessed. There's a good reason that the Palestinian human rights groups, the Israeli human rights groups, and then Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch made a designation that the crime of apartheid was being committed by Israel against the Palestinians. Now, none of that justifies what happened. But those of us who were pleading with American administrations, with others, to get to the root causes, how can you have Gaza be besieged? Of course, now the nature of the blockade is even more horrendous. But for 16, 17 years, Gaza has been under this permanent system of an envelope of control by Israel, where Israel measured exactly what could go in and go out. There was a freedom of information request on the Israeli side, which revealed that the Israeli policy was to keep Gaza just above starvation level. Now, that is going to blow up. It's blown up now. And the question is, do we still stay stuck in a place where Israel believes that only a military response, that only by bludgeoning the Palestinian people into submission, will they what? Will they accept more occupation? Or are we going to deal with politics? Now, I know that politics can't be the only conversation. And Israel is justified. It owes its own people their security. I think it's gone about it in the most unserious way. Israel knows, because there have been ongoing interactions between Israel and Hamas, mostly via third parties. Many in the Israeli security establishment said constantly, we need a political horizon. We could bring Hamas into that. We could offer an alternative to Hamas, which is kind of classic counterinsurgency. You try and pull the population away. But you can't just say, okay, we've created a military modus vivendi, and now we stop. We keep the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank weak. We keep Hamas just at this level. So there needs to be a political concept to go with whatever military concept there is. Either that involves saying Hamas will have to be part of this. That's clearly not where the narrative is now, because Hamas is being called the new Nazis, worse than ISIS, and we can come back to that. Or there has to be a different political concept.
You and I have been talking about Israel-Palestine for decades, and this largely got shoved under the rug. As the Abraham Accords were coming along, people began ignoring it, and it exploded. And I'm just interested in what, from an underground tectonic perspective, do you think is realistic in the future of getting rid of this pressure and resolving this in any credible way?
You have to understand a few things. First of all, there was an attempt in Oslo, imperfect, wasn't going to deliver total justice. It came at a particular moment where on the Palestinian side, there had been a support for actually a deal that many Palestinians would consider isn't a great deal. Just 22% of historic Palestine as a potential future state without addressing the refugee displacement. But the PLO had come on board with that position, had established relations with America in the late 80s. 30 years ago in 93, that gets put into the Oslo framework. Israel had gone through the first intifada, a largely unarmed civil uprising that extracted costs from Israel. International dynamics were shifting. And Israel thought, maybe we actually have to do something about this Palestinian question. We can't let it fester. This is over 30 years ago. We're in a unipolar American moment after the Cold War. And the basic deal is a Palestinian party committed to negotiations, committed to a peaceful resistance of this question. And America's role was to guarantee that this got delivered on. And given the power asymmetry, occupying state, occupied people, the primary American role was to make sure Israel would actually walk back the occupation and allow for there to be a Palestinian state. Now, that didn't happen. And we've gone through various iterations of how does one manage the outcome of America not playing the role designated for it in that equation. And we got more and more into fantasy.